Melanie Sumner, and today I'm going to speak with you about continuous accessibility and how you can better plan for accessibility as part of your engineering practice. I'm a decorated military veteran turned software engineer, and I'm so excited to speak with you all today. I work as a senior design systems engineer at HashiCorp. I'm also an invited expert for the WAI ARIA working group. And finally, I'm a member of the Ember.js framework core team, where I've been working on open source accessibility solutions that scale. Just in case you are new to accessibility, let's run through a few common terms. When I say accessibility, I'm referring to digital accessibility, specifically focused on making inclusive products so that people with disabilities can use what we create. You might also hear it referred to as A11Y, which is a shortened abbreviation, as there are 11 letters between the A and Y in the word accessibility. I'll also refer to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short, as the standard by which our applications are evaluated through the use of the success criteria that they provide. And finally, assistive technology includes the hardware or software that people with disabilities use to access the web or use mobile devices. For example, a person who is blind may use screen reader software to browse and use websites on the internet through desktop browsers or mobile devices. I give a lot of talks about accessibility, and I usually talk about what accessibility is and the things that we can do now. But this talk is different because it is a talk about a strategic vision for the future of accessibility and automation, and how I think we can get there. So this is my promise to you. In this talk, I will share my vision for a strategic path to continuous accessibility. I will inspire you to create something new or to contribute to an effort already in progress. I will empower you to think about accessibility in a way that is more aligned with the other things we already do in the business of shipping technical products. Before we get to the strategic visioning, though, I want you to close your eyes for just a moment and let yourself imagine. I want you to imagine having greater confidence in the quality of your code. I want you to imagine more easily delivering accessible experience at scale. And finally, I want you to imagine knowing that you've responsibly reduced the company's risk. The risk of losing potential customers, the risk of decreased usage from existing customers, or even the risk of facing accessibility lawsuits. In software engineering today, we have continuous integration, we have continuous deployment, and these two things alone have drastically improved the lives of software engineers. But now I want us to turn our thoughts to a new idea, continuous accessibility. How will we get there? How do we achieve this vision? We have to be on purpose. The well-established principles of continuous software engineering remind us to build quality in, to work in small batches, to let computers do the repetitive tasks so humans can solve the hard problems, to always be improving, and that everyone is responsible for doing these things. So how do these already existing principles apply to accessibility? I propose that there are 3 key points for achieving continuous accessibility. First, we must have a plan for the code we already have. How will we improve its accessibility? Second, we must plan for the code we will have in the future, the code we will create. And finally, we must have a plan for how to measure our work and show our progress. So let's dive into these 3 strategic implementation points. First, let's think about the code we already have. Any plans we make to improve the accessibility in our products should include plans for the code we already have. We need to think about the age of our code base. How long has that code been around? This will probably make us think about those dependencies that we'll need to upgrade. How do we plan for upgrades? It's great if we improve the accessibility of a common dependency, but what does this mean for existing users? What does their upgrade path look like? This will probably make us think about ease, or not, of delivering the latest and greatest. We need to carefully consider how we will deliver new features or new developer tools. Backwards compatibility and stability are important and, let's face it, sometimes overlooked in our race to build and ship new awesome things. Unless we've done this thoughtfully and purposefully, the very people we're trying to empower may reject the tools we have to offer them. This is especially true for apps that scale, or even apps that want to scale. It can be tricky to update a dependency, especially when it includes breaking changes. Depending on the size of your code base, taking in a new version of a dependency can mean extra developer coordination about which new features to use or when to do the implementation work. And there are also product and business priorities to consider. The features that we create for accessibility automation should make it simpler to deliver improved products and tooling to support accessibility as a facet of our craft. We can't just deliver accessibility improvements in a vacuum and expect things to go well, because they won't. For the code that we have now, we could wait for our users to report issues to us, but we run the risk of losing customers or reduced current customer engagement. We could also rely on accessibility audits to tell us where the issues are. But again, this is a little late in the app creation process. Ideally, we're automating checks with linting and testing, periodically manually checking the code we already have, and making sure the new code we are crafting is conformant. This will give us a higher level of confidence that as technology progresses, our applications will still work as expected. Of course, there's still a lot of opportunity for innovation in this area. But this approach allows automation to be our first line of defense, backed up by accessibility audits that we might need for certain customers who require accessibility perhaps as a condition of purchase. And finally, that will be backed up by user reports because users will still tell us when they run into blockers. Let's talk about our future code. We need to plan for the code we will write in the future, or we will be much more likely to make the same mistakes of our past. Who knows what will come next? The way we wrote code 10 years ago is different from the way we write code today. And who even knows how we'll write code 10 years from now? So what does our strategy need to prepare us for these unknown unknowns? Of course, we will still continue to follow the principles of continuous software engineering. I want to zero in on number 3, letting computers perform repetitive tasks so people can solve hard problems. In the area of accessibility automation especially, this is where we're seeing a lot more innovation. And I think where, if I can convince you, we will continue to see even more innovation in the future. To do that, let's look at the way automation in accessibility can help. Developers have access to automated testing for dynamic code analysis through the AxeCore library. And that has been and can be integrated into the continuous integration and delivery mechanisms that are already used to test and deliver our code. These days, developers have a lot of options too. AxeCore has been implemented in many different tools like Lighthouse or Microsoft's Accessibility and Insights. Even Ember.js, the open source JavaScript framework that I work on, we have a library called Ember A11y testing that can be integrated into your app for automated accessibility testing. For static analysis, developers can use things like Ember Template Lint, JSX A11y, Lit A11y, even Vue A11y is coming along. Each have varied levels of support. I want to talk a little bit about that. They mostly all work the same, but I'll talk through it by talking about Ember Template Lint because that's the one I'm most familiar with and have been working on for a few years now. Here are some of the key benefits. Developers can get linting feedback while they're writing their code. It also supports a plugin system that allows teams to define and use custom rules for their code base. Some rules have automatic fixes built right in, and running the fix flag will clean up all of the auto-fixable issues. Finally, it supports sharing configs across projects, so you can ensure that all of your teams are on the same page. And I think this is really especially valuable in today's globally distributed workforce. So I want to tell you a quick story. Before the latest versions of Ember Template Lint, we had a print pending flag. And that gave us a way to roll out new rules. You could take a list of current errors and basically make a ignore these errors list. But it relied entirely on teams to be proactive and treat it as a burn down list, not a ignore permanently forever list. Of course, quality engineering teams understand that we don't want to ignore these errors forever, but it's easy to forget something that doesn't have a deadline. One approach was to turn a rule off completely until all existing instances of that error were fixed. Of course, personal experience, this led to a never-ending cycle of trying to turn a rule on, finding new bugs, fixing those bugs, and starting all over again, because by the time you fixed all the bugs, new code would appear with those same errors. Not only was this approach time-consuming and costly, it was really disincentivizing. We'd have issues that could go into the lost void of forever, or stuck in a cycle of almost ready to turn a rule on. We needed to do something different. Instead of only having the option to turn the rule off or set it to warning or set it to error, we can now instruct the linter to find all existing instances of a rule that's broken and create a dated to-do for each. This improves on the previous approach in a couple of ways. After a period of time, the to-do turns into a warning, and the warning turns into an error, which acts as a forcing function. The build breaks. If we look at this from the perspective of the code we already have and the code we will create, we can see that we can break the problem into two different parts so we can immediately benefit. When a new lint rule is released, existing code will have the to-dos created and teams can plan to fix incrementally. Any new code is analyzed as the code is written, so no to-dos have to be created and no extra planning is needed. Now you might be wondering, okay, but can't teams just create a new to-do? And the answer is yes, of course they can. Because the tool is about empowering developer teams to move faster. It's about giving managers the right information so they can make the best planning decisions to support their team. It's about guidance, not control. On to the third key part of our strategy. Plan to measure our progress. Right now, there is no common shared standard for metrics in accessibility engineering, but my vision is to change that. Metrics play an essential part of our strategy. After all, metrics and reporting is how we empower our management and other decision makers to give us what we need. Things like time, things like budget, things like support and the vocalization of priorities. When we provide ways to measure this work, we are bridging a very important gap. Just in case you haven't had to work with metrics just yet, or haven't in a while, let's review 4 of the commonly accepted key criteria of quality metrics. Metrics must be meaningful. They must be connected to the goals we have or the strategy of our organization. They must be controllable. If a metric is not under your control or influence, it's not meaningful to report, even if it is useful to know about. Metrics should be easy to access. They should be easy to find, easy to identify, and visible to management. And finally, metrics must be actionable. Any metrics that we define must have actionable outcomes. But what do we mean when we say actionable outcomes? That could be pretty vague, right? Well, we can use them to diagnose a problem. An outcome could be to improve a process, set a goal, or observe trends that can inform future work. But before I get into the specific metrics that I think we should be measuring, I wanted to remind us of Goodhart's law. Our metrics should never themselves become the entire point. We won't actually achieve the outcomes we are after, improved accessibility and user experience, if we're merely trying to game the system. The first metric I'm proposing is potential violation count. This metric sets a baseline. Now, we all know that there are an infinite number of ways that things can go wrong in any given application, but that's not really what we mean here. With potential violation count, we want to make the unknown problem a known problem and then solve for each. The baseline is the total number of individual ways that an application could fail legal accessibility requirements. But how do we get to that itemized number? In WCAG, we have success criteria, known techniques, and common failures. There's also location-specific legal standards, like in America we have Section 508 or the Americans with Disabilities Act. Of course, all of these potential violations represent a massive effort that has already been completed by user research and accessibility experts, but how do you get that information in a practical way? Well, we do this by making an itemized list. Of course, there will be some overlap, but this work is worth doing because it gives us the peace of mind that we know the edges of this problem. We're turning an area of ambiguity into an area of clarity. We're making the unknown edges of the problem known. And this can help give us confidence. But before you think, oh my gosh, Mel, that's a lot of work, let me share with you an effort that has already begun to itemize potential violations. It's an open source project called the A11Y Automation Tracker, and it intends to compile each one of these itemized potential violations with details. There's an overall list, but there's also the ability to dive into each potential violation and see the details about how it can currently be tested. It also shows the existing linting rules and the libraries that they're in, the testing rules and the libraries that they are in, and the relevant WCAG success criteria with links to that documentation. Of these potential failures, my initial analysis has indicated that about half of them are either already automated or potentially automatable. But what does this mean about the other half? This means that the rest still require manual testing until technology sufficiently advances to programmatically determine these errors. For example, how do we codify intent? In a lot of cases, we still have the opportunity to innovate there. So think about that. But by taking advantage of the automation that is available to us, we can reduce the need for manual testing by nearly half. And that's a lot less manual testing that needs to be done. Some of you who are already familiar with the WCAG success criteria might be wondering, why not just use those as a checklist? Well, this is because they cover generalities rather than specifics. For example, WCAG 1.3.1, which deals with information and relationships, is a single success criterion, but relates to at least 25 different failure scenarios. Linting rules have to cover one specific failure, catching as many potential implementation syntax errors as possible. By identifying the edges of the potential violation count, we can then determine related metrics. Violations for which we can provide automatic linting for static analysis. Violations for which we can provide automated testing for dynamic analysis. Violations that require developer-authored tests, and violations that still require manual testing. These metrics are really useful if we build tooling. Once we set a baseline, we can target improvements. There are also metrics that we can look at from the accessibility audits we receive. What is the total bug count? What is the bug severity count? How severe of an impact do each of these bugs have for our users? For example, a nested interactive element like a link inside of a button will result in a complete blocker for a user with assistive tech. On the other hand, a main element with the role of main does not harm the user. It's merely redundant code that we should tidy up. Time to fix. How long does it take a team to resolve an issue? This can be a signifier of a process issue within a team or an organization, or maybe a signifier that accessibility hasn't been vocalized as a priority. If we track this metric, we can start to look at potential causes to help us make our apps healthier. And finally, let's measure violation frequency. In most modern applications, we use components, so maybe we can track what components need to be updated. Maybe we'll see that a specific team is contributing a violation more frequently than others. That's an opportunity to level up our engineers. So I've given us some essential metrics to track, but what sorts of things should we hope to learn from them? What kind of an impact should we expect to have? We could expect at a minimum to see some trends as a result of the actions we take. If we work, for example, on tooling, we could expect to see an increase in the number of automated linting rules and tests, since we have a better way to identify specific possible violations. We can also expect to see developers writing more accessibility-related tests, since we're providing them with more guidance and education, and it will be in their minds. We can also expect to see a decrease in support requests for accessibility experts within the organization, because developers will have more linting and testing coverage and a greater awareness of accessibility in general. This awareness should lead to fewer accessibility-related issues in new code, specifically issues we can't write an automated test for yet. And since we've integrated automation, we should see fewer issues in new code that has the automation applied to it. Our audit-related metrics could also inform processes from a business and legal perspective, as they can be used in a few ways. They can help to quantify risk of legal action. When risk is quantified, we can then quantify the reduction in that risk by taking specific steps to remedy the issues. While this might be a business justification, the result is that our users have an improved user experience, which seems like a win-win. Improved monitoring means that development teams can know sooner if a product's conformance deteriorates at a rate outside of acceptable thresholds. It can help us determine a threshold for new learning opportunities. If a high percentage of developers keep writing non-conformant code in a specific way, we can then produce materials that will help them on their learning journey. We can also use these trends to determine an app's overall accessibility health. Maybe put it in what's that thing people really love at work? Reporting dashboards. Imagine being able to check on a product and see how it's doing and get all of that information really easily and quickly. It could be used to inform decisions, rationalize time, budget, etc. It could be used to demonstrate that an investment in accessibility tooling for engineers and designers could make a big difference. It could even be used by sales teams when a potential client wants to know about our app's accessibility conformance. Frankly, there are a lot of use cases, but it all comes down to this. Everyone will be more informed about the decisions they make. In addition to trend analysis, we can use the metrics we gather to inform future work, like which potential violations currently require manual testing but could reasonably be automated and just hasn't been done yet. What violations happen the most? Is there something that we could create to make that problem go away or to make it easier? How could we make it faster for developers to fix the issue that seemed to take a long time to resolve? Is it a code problem? Is it a tooling problem? Is there a problematic process in place? We'd know. I think that there could reasonably be additional metrics to be considered here, but the ones I've discussed give us a solid start to quantifying accessibility in our engineering practice, which brings us closer to continuous accessibility. I think the single biggest thing that we can give not only ourselves, but also our senior management is information. The information they need to support us from a business perspective. The thing is, accessibility is a civil right, and it is also an emotional issue. And that seems like it can be at odds with business in general. But I envision an environment where it doesn't have to be. We can accept as a company value that accessibility is a facet of quality. We can also rationalize the work that needs doing with numbers, just like every other part of the business. Maybe in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to do these things, but also we can do this. So why not give business what it needs? After all, the outcomes are what matters. You can use sites like pleasefunda11y.com, which is a website that provides a list of the known areas where funding or support would improve the state of accessibility across the web. Maybe your company has engineering time that can be used to help solve some of these issues. Maybe your company has funding that can be allocated to hire technical writers to improve the state of accessibility documentation. Or perhaps you can contribute to some of the open source projects that exist to provide linting rules for the framework you already use. Another potential outcome is to develop training materials that help relate the information people already know to accessibility concepts that maybe they don't. Like this training project that I've been working on at HashiCorp. It helps relate existing design heuristics with accessibility concepts. There are so many possible outcomes here, it's like a choose your own adventure. There's room for everyone to contribute. At the beginning of this talk, I made a few promises. So let's see if I kept them. As we have looked at how to think about our code and what metrics to consider, I hope you've seen the path forward for continuous accessibility. I hope I have inspired you to create something new or to contribute to an effort already in progress. I hope I have empowered you to think about accessibility in your design or code, or even in your process, and think about that in a new way. And if you're a decision maker, I hope that I've shown you that continuous accessibility is the thing you've been waiting for. Continuous accessibility is good for business, but it's great for users. And that's what we're really going for. Thank you.